Hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm Barbara Corcoran, Vice President for Continuing and Public Education at the New York Botanical Garden. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you for coming. It was such a lovely day today. I hope you all got to spend a little bit of time outdoors. It's a beautiful night. It's my pleasure to welcome the second speaker in our portfolio series, Daniel Vasini, for tonight's talk, Landscape Transformations. I'd like to take a moment to thank Susan Cohen, who founded this series and has curated it since its inception 21 years ago. And special thanks to Monica Heimbold and her family for their generous support of the series for all these years. So, Daniel Vasini joins us tonight. He's from West 8, an award-winning international landscape architecture practice with offices in Rotterdam, New York, and Belgium. Daniel is the creative director of West 8 New York, where he leads multidisciplinary teams as they tackle complex design and planning challenges and envision solutions for the major urban design issues of our time. Daniel's specialty is in transformative urban waterfront projects that address infrastructure, urbanization, sustainability, nature, and history. Just last month, one of the West 8's signature projects, their extraordinary reimagining of Governor's Island, was honored by the APA, American Planning Association, who included it as a great public space on their annual Great Places in America list. You'll hear more about that tonight, along with a host of other forward-thinking, sustainable design solutions. So let's get to it. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our speaker, Daniel Vasini.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you very much for coming here tonight. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I would like to also once more thank you, the Hainsbowl family, because without your support, this wouldn't be possible. At the same time, Susan, Gregory Long, and Barbara, thank you for allowing today West 8 to present their work. And most important to the team who's here also, I asked them, I normally lecture around the country, but rarely in New York. So it was a great opportunity to have them actually come and see and reflect a little bit of what we're doing. Landscape transformations. It's a subject, obviously, that when you begin thinking about a subject for a lecture, you start speculating what shall that be, and you go back and forth with the editor. But I feel for the first time comfortable from the beginning with actually the title, and the rest is just to develop a content. So I have quite a lot to share today, and I will excuse myself if I don't make it to the end. I will try my best. But to be very honest, our PR strategy, we are not like Beaker Ingalls, with all the respect, I'm quite a friend of him, but our approach since I joined West 8, over 10 years plus years ago, is to actually focus on the projects and give your best. And then the clients will come and see the resolution of the work, and that's basically our PR mechanism. But today we have a window and actually an audience, so I would like to share with you, the audience, the work that we've been doing for a little while. So I made a short list which I'd like to share with you. So of course we're going to start with GI, which is kind of the beginning and the commencement of our New York office. Which is transforming from topography. So the transformation from topography is actually the core asset. Soundscape specifically is transforming through character, patterns, and planting, which generates a microclimate. Longwood is actually transforming a little bit from a strategy of master planning, so it's very strategic. And then at the end, I would like to close, if time's allowed, with Duke as kind of merely transforming through the built environment. So how can you actually understand context and propose a series of strategies that will tailor a best outcome? So to give a little bit of history, I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with West 8, but it all starts with this book. It's Polder's book. It's a book that actually our design director, Adrian Jose, actually started before he founded West 8, over 30 years ago. And it really gave him, the credibility and the asset to really document the whole territoire of the Netherlands, and therefore was the base foundation to start his practice. I don't know how many of you are familiar with polders, but Westade is actually founded in the Netherlands. It's coming from a Dutch heritage, so therefore the notion and understanding of doing, claiming land from the sea is actually the DNA of how we do landscapes and our approach to a landscape architecture, which is different from other schools, for instance, the French school of landscape architecture. But to help communicate to the audience, this is just, for example, a cartography of how to make a polder. So if you can read here in the plan, you could see that before this is just the meander, and this is just marshes and swamps. That over time, engineers in the 1500s with cattle, they basically dump soil and actually create land out of water. It was quite revolutionary. You have to understand in the 15 and the 1600s, you're making land out of water and you're selling it. Therefore, it's actually quite profitable. It's a quite good way to understand the way of making landscape per se, which is man-made. And here's a perfect example. So you can see a dike, which is basically the first thing you'd built on the surrounding, right? You can see also the windmills and the farmhouses, and then you have a number, which is actually the name of the number of the lot that you can sell, whoever decided to pursue this entrepreneurial. And here you can see this is the polder, so land that is making from man-made, and this cattle, 1600s. You can see the scale is just the size of 2 cattle rolling, right? And then here the windmills, and then this is a marshes and swamp, brackish water, and that's actually what we reclaim. So it's actually, you didn't gain it from the sea, but they started from, from lakes and swamps and marshes. And here the condition, of the famous, Netherlands or lowlands. So you can see this land is actually lower and this is a bit higher. So you always have to play with the different levels and pumping and the windmills, doing the work. But basically the conception of Westade from our kind of practice of landscape architecture, really this is the starts from here, no? And it's very critical. You might understand what then Westade really means, but from the beginning we were just looking for a simple name that you could just pick up the phone and say, hello, this is Westade, and don't come with a Dutch complex name. But at the same time it has a second meaning with a second layer, which has to do with narrative, which is very important when you conceive landscape architecture. So the second layer of Westade is winds, which are predominantly coming from the west, and 8 is actually the scale that if you hit a west 9, then this living ecosystem dies. The tree will fall because the wind is too strong. So it's actually that edge. So it's actually that balance that if you go to West 9, the dikes will break and there will be a catastrophe. But if you stay at West 8, you're right at the edge. And the beauty of it is it's very, Darwinistic. It's that the trees are starting to develop branching to balance the wind. So you can see they're being blown because it's constant wind in the Netherlands. But the beauty of nature that is actually smart and just giving little time and they will react. So the polder is actually the way of doing land maken, is doing a land, back in the 1600s. But this is how the Dutch do land today. Coming from the lessons learned of Dubai, and this is, just in the early 2000 until 2020, this is called the Maasvlakte. This is in the port of Rotterdam, but basically this is all man-made, and it's very simple. It just starts by, land reclamation. This is really offshore business, where you just have the boat Queen Beatrix pumping sand to the water. And that notion of creating landscapes from a more infrastructural perspective, not agricultural, but how can you actually work together with a team of multidisciplinary teams of landscape architects, civil engineers, marine engineers, ecologists, etc., to achieve. And why do you say, why this obsession of actually continuing to extend? Then the Dutch culture, so some of you that maybe are, from the Netherlands here, it's a very efficient culture. So it's very simple. The technology of the marine, and mercantile boats is pushing offshore, because if they bring the boats all the way to downtown New York or downtown Rotterdam, they will have to dredge every day, and physically it creates a huge impact. So the offshore for the containers is right there. But the next layer is not just landscape architecture, it's landscape architecture and the idea of creating land, but it's also the legacy of planning. So I would say if the Netherlands has to export, cows, tulips, and cheeses, it also has to export landscape architecture on the infrastructural level to do islands in Dubai, not the best example, but also exporting planning. So there is a heritage in planning from the practice of landscape architecture and urban design that I'm going to get at. So this document actually expressed, this is Rotterdam city center, and over the years how it has been growing outwards. And this is crucial because, in the economy of the global market, if Rotterdam Port stops growing, eventually they can no longer compete with China. So they know that their growing curve is 2% a year. Therefore, you need to plan for it. Otherwise, you cannot compete. And obviously, in the Netherlands, we have situations where there is, a more reduced space. It's not a continent like in America. So here you can see the port has basically a jurisdiction, which is everything in gray footprint, is the jurisdiction of the port. And the only solution is actually to grow outwards because of development pressures, ecology, because of heritage of cities. However, you may see, if some of you are ecologists sitting there, there is always, you have to give back, which is pretty much coming. I come from the Netherlands Antilles, where actually you have to give back. So if you build an oil well camp, you have to put a school. So in the same way here, you have to give back, and everything that is in yellow is basically ecology projects that when you actually add all this up, is equal to the footprint of the extension. So it is not that you have to preserve to develop, but you have to develop and also take into account how you give back, which is it's just part of the negotiation. Otherwise, if they don't grow 2%, then the economy is condemned and all of the rest. So just a few tips. So at the end of the day, the legacy of landmaking in the Netherlands is pretty much on a specific DNA that they carry, and this is basically what exports out. And this is also in the practice when we do landscape architecture, goes in the same way. But sorry, I didn't realize that actually this is in Dutch, but some of you. But basically, when you do a new land, a new Netherlands, which is low, basically you're creating a new ecology. When you do new landscape architecture, you create a new economy. When you do landscape architecture, you create recreation. When you do land architecture, you create security or safety. So all of them is actually the new tendency that from the beginning, when you do designs, you bring it on everybody on the table in a multidisciplinary approach at the first time. And all of this is a byproduct of each other and is in balance. So as I move to the next step, back in the late 2000s, early 2000s, basically the Wind Atlas exposed out there when the new government was empowered in the Netherlands that 80,000 dwellings would basically happen in suburban Netherlands because there needs to be a growth in housing. And here is just a footprint of basically the country of the Netherlands. And you see in black all the cities, or let's call it like this, urban footprints, and the rest is basically countryside, farmland, non-developed areas. But what this is telling you is actually the stress of sprawl, how in such a small country could take cover, and before you know it, there is no farmland, there is no countryside, and how you create that balance goes back to the legacy of planning. So it's such a critical in the mindset and ecosystem compared with America, where you can just grow, the territory is so vast. But here we have to be very careful in terms of protecting the landscape. So there is some sort of DNA in our brains as landscape architect. If you're trained in the Netherlands, how do you do landscapes that actually are protected, or how do you really control the urban environment, and therefore you take care of open space? So what you see here is actually an exhibition that we did when the announcement of the government said that 80,000 dwellings will be actually exposed out there, and it will mean there will be some impact in the farmland. So we did this exhibition in the Rotterdam Biennale where we literally issue 80,000 dwellings and a mini scale and put it in a plot which is almost the same size of the Netherlands to create that sense of awareness that the heritage cities such as Delft, and here you can see, could be impacted and affected because. So imagine if you will move the camera to the side and then the heritage of this landscape, in this case the built environment landscape, will be thread by suburban, and I think everybody knows what that looks. Or also how that future housing will impact the contrast of the countryside. So what is the right balance? And therefore, in that case, densification was actually the answer. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to give this quick introduction preamble on how our DNA and system is basically conceived at the moment of project designs. It goes all the way back to the Mercator areas and that ambition, with the pilgrims coming all the way to the New World here in Manhattan. And I would like to start with the first project as Governor's Islands. By coincidence, Governor's Islands also encounter by Adrian Bloch, who won his first step in Governor's Islands, and you can see it here. This is this is already post colony times. You can see Lower Manhattan already settling and going up, not so much happening in Brooklyn yet. But the shared history is really telling you that the first settlement was actually Governor's Island. And it was very safe. It was actually very intuition. You arrive there, you can see Manhattan from Governor's Island. You can understand who is in Lower Manhattan, so you can always be safe. You can see here actually the Manhattaners, the native Manhattaners, trying to avoid what's happening here. The boats is a perfect harbor, could just sit there. Waters are calm, and it starts the first trade, all the way back, into the 1600s. You can see here the island. You can see here some early, this is more in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, of true Dutch settlements. And obviously, over time, all of this has been lost. But starting with the first project, Governor's Island, then you can see the shared history of actually, it looks, and it was called from Governor's Island, Knot Island, because it had the shape of a knot. When the Dutch have it. But then here you can see all of this, by coincidence, is also a landfill, not made by Dutch, made by Americans because of the Lexington Tunnel. So all that excavation was actually creating the landfill, and it was used for many years until early 2000, thanks to Senator Hillary Clinton, who gave it back to the city, Mayor Bloomberg, to then state that let's make Manhattan greener, one policy. And actually he achieved it. So we feel very proud and be part of that effort. Here's Governor's Island, which I will speak in a moment. But what is really taken away is when we did the competition as landscape architect, one of the things I learned through the practice is actually how can you start a proposal without really being too invasive into the existing and actually acknowledging the history. So for us it was very simple, just draw a very pragmatic line over here, and said everything of the new proposal will actually happen in the landfill. So we respect the history, we don't touch the history, which was actually very simple, and we were surprised how well it was received, specifically by the team of the National Park Service. And then living in two side development zones that Mayor Bloomberg said, we'll take care of the development later, this first deliver a place. So landscape first, it's quite an exception. While our current president was also targeting to buy the island, but actually start with development and place later. So I think you all know what that means. This is where we are. I'm going to explain a little bit about the office because, again, today we have the audience and I have the opportunity to share who we are, how we work, and how we think. This is our studio, so I'm letting you enter into our kitchen. I have our colleague over there in the back, Tommy, who actually takes care of a little detail. But it's a very collaborative shared spaces. We have only one policy, and they're going to laugh, but it's basically we don't allow headphones because we need to hear to each other. We need to understand where are the pressures and the critical thinking so we can actually exchange ideas and materials. And because even myself, I'm still not so old, but I still suffer from that everything is digital. And in our practice, it needs to be printed. We need to really understand the scale. So here is just, a daily photo where we actually have to take out of those emails. What is it, those files are the sent? It's critical, otherwise we're going no mail. So this is just a curiosity. The second layer is really, we have a culture of what is the best idea, no matter from where and who is coming from. The best idea always wins. And this is actually something that states that we are not sacrosanct. Like, back in the modernism was that sacred land in black. And don't even dare to change it because it's sacred. I'm actually trained in my background as an architect and I understand what that means. So landscape architecture taught me process. And the beauty of landscape architecture is actually, design is not relevant, it's the outcome, it's the process, it's the strategy. We work together with our Rotterdam office, so this is Doug actually touching base, with Rotterdam. We have 2 clocks, we understand the different time zones. This is actually on the other side of the ocean. This is Emanuele looking through his eyes, and we're about 70 people over there. We are only 18 here in New York. And everything nowadays is also 3D and virtuals, but also the fact that whatever you do in 3D, you need to grab that in physical model. So in the array of projects that I'm about to show you is much about process. And today I have the opportunity, because I never had the opportunity to do this in PR and newspaper, this is basically our leadership here in New York office. Adrian is our design director who established the office, 30-year plus, more or less. We're already in 32. I'm the creative director, and I happen to have the pleasure to collaborate with Donna, Docs, and Ashley, who are here tonight. And we are actually having a great experience. And today we want to actually walk you through the array of the projects we've been working, especially speaking, since 2015, because the reason why we opened an office here in New York, not because we were aggressive that we want to be in the market, but we happened to won this competition, Governor's Island, and the only thing that the client demanded was to open an office. So we opened an office. Governor's Island started back in 2008 formally. And since then, we've been here. We just delivered in 2015. And then we say, should we close it up, pack our bags and leave? Obviously, the first answer was no. Why? So I was in the Netherlands at the time, and Adrian asked me if I could actually come and share a little bit of the culture, because at the end of the day, it's about, the know-how culture. So here is the moment of the opening. You can see, from the National Park Service, all the stakeholders, the Leslie Koch, Mario Bloomberg, Adrian's at the corner, Amanda Burton, and the whole crew. And from the beginning, West State is always very simple in the conception of the idea. So we have from the beginning a little bit of, let's call it, democratic agenda of the idea of having some hills, some sort of landscape formation to transform this flat pancake that had no sense of place, no scale, blown away by wind. And we wanted to compete with the skyline of Manhattan, so you can come for these hills for free and actually discover an island that has been completely forbidden to all Manhattaners, and now they're going to go to the center of gravity. Olmsted Prince, excuse me, better than in Central Park, I think, because it's outstanding, the panorama views that you get when you get at that destination at the end of the hills. So that's pretty simple, the project. We also thank you to the great philanthropy that happened to make this happen between Mayor Bloomberg and the people who he shared. And I think that was really something that I would like to say that makes America very different. And countries like Canada, they can barely catch up with this, philanthropy spirit that America has. So transforming through topography is basically the legacy, in this case, that we learned from the grandfather of landscape architecture, Olmsted. That's what he taught us. And it was very interesting because every time we were trying to step away from this undulation, the client, will have an issue with the way how the morphology of the plan was evolving. So we had to go to a little bit of Olmstedian plan work to kind of express and communicate with a client the beauty and how the sinuous and undulation of the expression of the topography. This was completely flat, and we introduced topography to really understand and make it a place where you can follow sequence, follow your intuition, and understand how to navigate through the plan. So imagine such a vast land, that you don't have no topography. The red line means that actually what is outside the red line will flood. So our first strategy is to play with a little bit of topography, and with that topography create undulation to highlight different silhouettes for human and eye level, which we study in computer. In that sense, also to secure the investment. To secure the investment that if tomorrow there is an event, basically we make sure that we can deliver a park. And that was a very simple and pragmatic approach that we took, and allowing 2 development zones on each side for future development, maybe of an academic purpose. Where did that landfill came from? Well, here's the answer. There was a series of barracks. We made a very important inventorization of the whole island and took all those buildings that didn't have any value, basically demolished them, put them below the landfill, and then just cap it in a very sustainable way to allow framing and reframing the views. So there are basically 3 hills: Outlook Hill, Discovery Hill, and Slide here. And, playing with a little bit of recyclable. So this is actually a little bit of improvisation, although lawyers don't like to hear that. But, this is called the scramble. And the scramble is basically the leftover of the seawall from 1800 that they were charging us millions of dollars to take it away of the island. And our first approach with a crew of Portuguesians is to actually to reuse it, to create, and then we'll learn from that. So that is actually the core of the practical landscape architecture. It's not to be so fixed on the plan, but actually reading from the site, researching the site, seeing the outcomes to be able to implement it. And this is actually the highest slide, thank you, of Manhattan, nested in green. Today is actually is amazing. And children's, they feel safe because it's all intuitional and oriented. The second stage of it, which was phase 1, we had to make our choice where to invest our dollars. So we said from the beginning, I think the dollar should go on the topography, transforming through topography, because if tomorrow there's an event, we still want to have a park. And the soil will also guarantee that you have great trees. Therefore, that was the investment. You cannot have great trees and not having great soil. So that actually sets the foundation. Therefore, we bet for younger trees. As you can see, the nursery of the future hammock groves, allowing these little pockets for hammocks and actually see the sky. Here you can see a young forest taking over, and it's natural selection when perhaps every other tree will go away. That was the bet to have actually achieved the budget. And here you can see, in this case, Hammock Grove, looking back to Liggett Terrace and the skyline of Manhattan. And phase one, Liggett Terrace, which was actually ideally designed in a very Tuileries style, where you can just, lay down in green, step away of Manhattan, step away of the noise, read the New York Times and see your children playing in the backdrop in a very low key. It is not about show business, it's about being relaxed. It's about microclimates in the middle of the Hugandorns. And at the end of the day, the simple agenda when we began this project, one statement, was to make it bikeable for all. So at that time, it was something completely new where families would bring their children away of the stress of the vehicles of Manhattan, get on a ferry, and actually in the same effect that you have in the subway, it doesn't matter your social condition or what is your income level, everybody's sitting shoulder to shoulder, kids shares the bike, and then the fun really starts from the beginning. And there was only one statement. And I think this we always learn from Leslie Koch and her leadership. Everybody is invited. You try to make something Central Park, you will be surprised about the paperwork you have to sign. So that was the beginning of Governor's Island, which actually we feel very proud, but nothing wrong, but we would like to get a little bit deep in the sequence of projects that we are about to display today. And while we were designing Governor's Islands, obviously, there was a moment of pause, like in any other project. So all of a sudden, the project goes to master plan level, and then there is a year that they say, okay, we have a staff of 5 people, what shall we do? And you are waiting for funding, and then you go with SD and so forth. So Soundscape actually was the oxygen that kept us alive through 2009, 2011, awaiting that the plan comes back. And it was a quite experience because, as you might remember, 2008 was the crash, and Frank Gehry was just commissioned to design this building. And all of a sudden, it was a little bit of a political issue because budget and concern if this would actually be possible. And I will explain a little bit more into that. It's located right here, the New World Symphony. I think most of you know where Lincoln Road is, at the beach, 17th Street, Convention Center, the Jackie Theater, the City Hall. It's right like behind Lincoln Road. And at that time, people said, oh, you are not sitting on Lincoln Road. So we say, don't worry. I think it's a good site. You're very strategically located, and you're tapping 1 block away from Lincoln Road. And in this case, we're transforming through changing a use of the lessons from the 50s. I want to remind you, Miami is just 100 years old. So here in the 50s, car parking was actually in downtown all over the place, and we feel quite proud to be part of this legacy where we're trying to understand what kind of a scale we wanted to pursue. For our understanding, this is about 100 meter plazas, like 380 feet. So we were in the struggle, should this be more of a plaza hardscape that actually is quite missing in Miami? It should be a green of campus design, the campus green, right? That is in the military pose. So there was like this intrinsicy within the client team. And we say we might have to meet in the middle and find a solution. And therefore you have to bet on your process to allow the process to tell you what should be the outcome. The next layer is that, Frank Gehry had a very modest building. So the first modest building after Bilbao, so it was just a white box. And then the whole fun happened and starts. And from moment one, the brief of actually what can we do with such a white building, it was to understand the use of these walls. The fund was inside, so the whole investment, it was 2008, was actually making sure what he does best, learning from the Walt Disney Music Hall, and it's actually amazing. This is actually how it looks in reality while it's taking performance. But also the idea of this white box and how can we actually take this outside. This is the outcome today, so it's called the Wallcast. But that was, from the philanthropy level, everybody who were investing the dollars, they were making sure how can we allow that, classical music is a resource for all, and if they don't know how to buy a ticket, they can still achieve it. So that was the main brief. There was really no strategy how the project should look alike. There was only one brief to accommodate the Wallcast. Very simple. And from the city side, they just want to say, I want to be able to maintain it. And this is the foyer, and it's quite beautiful. And we wanted to actually to tap on these geometries to be able to kind of see it through the foyer and extrapolate and connect in the same way of the Wallcast. So when the Wallcast is off, how can I take out the beauty of Frangeri out to the park? So we went to the drawing board, and our process is a very organic process. We go through the sketch session, and we're trying to inform our designs until we hit it, and it's just through sketching. It's very simple. And through sketching, you have to understand the formation, and the pattern of the mosaic pattern was actually born. And then we're just adding a little bit of, the 50-50, so how much is hardscape, how much is softscape, gave us the result of this beautiful composition. So exposing out the beautiful geometries that actually on the human level perception, you ain't gonna be able to read. You will not even understand where it's coming from, but it's Mondrian, it's an abstraction in a very contemporary place, in a place that used to be a parking lot, and now all of a sudden has a unique identity, and it's an anchor and a reference for everybody in the corner. And then by simply adding, as much as if you open your fridge and take out alfalfa and just put it on top of it, and one species fits all, yes, monoculture, but you have to understand that we're dealing with the city that they say we have hurricane seasons, every tree falls, hurricane season, I don't accept anything. So the bending of the vicha trees, and actually the vicha is creating the projection of the shade, and is actually giving us that urban oasis that we were looking for. With some strategic, royal poncianas to bring a little bit of colors, and some old oaks at the anchoring, with also the bougainvilleas, which I will go in a minute. But you can see here the projection, although they're very thin and tall and beautiful, they're always moving their fingers, but you can see the projection of the shadows, so it really creates an urban oasis effect in a very modest way. The second layer, we were so eager and inspired by the hurricanes, and we come from the Netherlands, and the wind for us is almost the beat of our heart. We took that abstraction to actually create this pergola structure that their main role is to actually perform as portals, as gateways to the park. James Jacobs taught us good park, good edges. So you really need these anchors. We're intuitional people. You don't need a sign, but this portal, these archways really create, the feeling that you want to walk underneath. It's human brain. You don't need to do, a mathematical formula. So we were inspired by creating this kind of vortex of the hurricanes to create this portal in a very abstract way, without being kitsch, without being, Art Deco, and create this new identity, which is basically emerging from that pattern, and then having the bougainville little by little taking over. I have encountered many people on the streets, I really don't like the bougainville, you just please leave it naked. But and that wasn't conceived that way. But here you can feel the tunnel effect. Immediately you feel as a human, I want to go in there, I want to explore, I want to see what happens. And that was mainly the effect. To conclude, the Wallcast, it was very important because, as obsessed designers, the first thing you want to do, and if you understand musicians, is that there will be cables everywhere and there were speakers everywhere, and this is outdoors. So we were really understanding how to conceive, an integration of the sound system that it was so well executed that even Disney was jealous, and now this is what they use as a replica to do outdoor. This was pioneer at this time, and now you can see how this model is just copying. So this tubular system that you can see here, through a grill, all the speakers are safe, and actually they are designed for sound with a projector at the end with airco. So it's all integrated, and it's weatherproof, and it's maintainable, accessible, and the screw is the same screw that the city of Miami wants to be, and it was for us a great lesson. If I tell you the budget of the park, basically I would like to tell you that this item took about 75%, this technology. 25% goes just in trees and ponds. That's the truth. So it was originally intended, the brief was 500 people. Today's 2,000 people are showing up, 2,000 people. And it was so successful that I have a second story to share later. But at the end of the day, it is very mission-oriented. It's about the culture of the New World Symphony. It's about the projection of what's happening inside to the outside. The city also wanted now to project movies, but actually, the New World Symphony is we're mission-oriented, and I think it makes total sense. So here, one of the early days in the openings, you can see only 500 people, now 2,000 showing up. So the next layer comes actually, and it's a good segue, is the Miami Beach Convention Center, which Ashley, since she arrived in the office, she's really helping us to help achieve this. And, it's going to be open by the end of the year, we hope so. and then to try to continue to tailor the park, because a park, when you open, it's not just finished, you have to continue to work. So if you can see here, this is Soundscape Park, right there. This is the new World Symphony. This is the city of Miami. This is their parking lot. This is another parking lot for the municipality, Macy's. And this is the convention center. You can see the Art Deco ways, and guess what? Parking. Guess what? Parking. Guess what? Parking. Guess what? This used to be parking. So the city said, we will be very interested to work with you, and we went through an RFQ and RFP process, but we want to tap on the success of Soundscape. And this was the beginning, together with Fentrade Architects, to achieve a plan that actually do what do best, going back to the heritage of the Netherlands, master plan strategy. So here you can see actually this execution. This is a photo from a week ago, where we're actually bringing back the character of the pattern as the new identity for the district, for the arts, people, and culture of the whole. So it's not the city hall, it is not civic, it's people-oriented, it's art and culture-oriented. This is where Art Basel, which is actually the new economy that is driving Miami every end of the year, and this is part of that. So here you can see on a different scale, this is at the same scale of Bryant Park, for those of you who are familiar. So, 5 acres and so, 1 acre of green lawn, while Soundscape is just, about 3 acres, so it's just, a quarter of that. Here we have a different approach, so we didn't go with the alfalfa bicha trees, but we wanted to do more of a park, and created a very thick green edge, which will buffer for those who are in the inside. Here, just an early artist impression when we did actually the competition and the RFP. But to teach a little bit, like, we don't think within the line, so if you hire us, we're gonna think outside the line. And this is Miami Beach Convention Center Park. This is Soundscape. But for us, it was very critical to let them understand the legacy of connectivity through green streetscape. So everything that you see in green is our agenda, no matter if we don't meet the budget to pay us, but we do it on purpose to actually make sure that this is green. So connecting green, all of the networks of open spaces, that is basically our mission. And that's what we focus on for the past 5 years. It's actually now executed, so I'm just gonna walk you through a series of images. So you can see the testing of the artist's impression reflecting the clouds. The fenestration is done actually by Arquitectonica. The building is done by Fentress, and it was a collaboration, but from the beginning we really wanted to achieve, so we brought back the vichas on the streetscape to achieve the success. The root ball is actually very good for urban conditions, and you can see that greenery of the streetscape, which is really rare in Florida. You're always baked in the sun. If you don't have sunglasses, your flare is actually burning your cornea. So for us, it was very important to bring the green into the streetscape. This is on Washington Street. You can see how comfortable I feel. I want to walk there. Pockets, and then on the Collins Canal, which also was a parking lot, we basically redesigned it in a soft way. It's a coastal condition right next to the edge of the canal, where we have 2 pathways, one for bicycle and another one which is just for people to meander. And we have here all the sculptures that are actually related to the program of public art that Art Basel and the city are taking over. But the major takeaway of this Collin Canal is it's all a system of negligible parks that they all share their pathway structure, so it's part of a character and identity. It is not bold that you can read it on a billboard, but it's bold in the sense enough that you understand when you're reading the paving where you are, and it's part of a collection. And here you can see, which was our mayor's asset from the beginning. We actually designed this park 2 times, and it was basically because of this. This is our working horse. So the first plan was conceiving to actually just remove them all. And I think after talking to the client and really educating the client, the idea of keeping it, so we actually redesigned it again. That was actually Ashley's first task. Made this beautiful, continuous canopy to deliver place. Imagine this with young trees. It will not deliver. So very simple, and this is the importance. So we went there, we survey it, we redraw the whole thing. You can recognize the paving patterns, in this case, through understory planting. You can see the heritage house, you can see the arts on the wall. There is a big, we call it a tree of life, which is a ficus, sitting there, and this is infrastructure, which is all shaded with green. So how do you make it simple and easy? This is our early first sketch, so I just wanted to share you, after many options, this is what the option you can see and recognize the sculptural elements within of it. and it's actually a coastal condition within the future. This will be all populated with mangrove right at the edge of the canal. And if it floods, all of this can flood, and then we keep this is outside the flooding zone. And I was quite passionate about it because of keeping the trees, and the only way I could convince the client was actually to do in this elevation, just like a Venice elevation, but actually with living species. So this was the elevation that made that job to be considered and have a sidewalk. Another fascinating element was actually the fact that all of these royal palms that are here actually were actually relocated. So we took them out to preserve them. We brought it to a nursery, and they were sitting there because this was staging area, and then we actually brought them back. Obviously, not many of them survived, but some of them did. So I would like to say over 80% of them did survive, and here they are. And actually, it brings back a memory for those people that so many times, I don't understand this place anymore, but we also need to help humans to recognize the space and how it used to be. And the tree of life, which was always there for us, there's no way you're going to touch it. So every time we went to a site visit, we didn't have much at the beginning other than making sure that this tree was well protected and that was kept, because obviously it's very close to the building and so on. That was Collins, Canal, but it's really the agenda of the network park of open spaces. It's actually, this is another photo from the other quarter, like a couple of days ago, where you can see the network of the path coming through. But again, it's all about scale and proportion. However, this park also went twice over design, and it was because they actually told us, we forgot to tell you that we need to accommodate a tent. And all of a sudden, I met with the Design Miami team and said, Daniel, that was always in the brief. But in their brief, but not was in the city brief. However, then I was asked, do you think a tent could happen within the park? Sure. I just have to redesign it. But so we went, not on a tour, but we looked to the precedents. Is the pad in London, this is Berkeley Square, or the Frieze as well. So yes, it can happen. You can do it. But it was an important agenda also for the economy, also for the relationship of the business with Art Basel and Design Miami. Is there one partner? So we went. This is the former design, so I'm not teasing. And in fact, the former design, so I'm glad we had the opportunity. We had even more hardscape. You can see the footprint of a memorial. Now that got reduced by the mayor, say, smaller here. Let's give it green. Nothing wrong with the memorial, so it was very political controversial, but it was, let's give it to sustainability. And that is actually the case here. There's a flexible zone, but you can see how the park even got greener. We had to accommodate, again, racing above because of the issues of Miami and flooding. So we had to accommodate contouring all the way to 7 feet to create a plateau where the tent could be safe. And then reorganize the whole planting with exception. So we want this little bottle here to keep these two. So they say, okay, we can work around it. We love it. The patio is the canteen, fine. So this area is not actually covered, so we can keep the trees. And then actually bring all the massing of the trees. Like I said before, different the soundscape, completely different scale. So it is the character of the pattern, but at the same time here, what we're trying to do is to create a more dense green ecology of continuous canopy of a grove that over time will take place. A physical model that we made to make sure with a little bit of color like the Ponciana, so they're just blushing on the cheek of the park. And here you can see the cafe and the terrace. So we were able to accommodate that. We delivered for second time. We went again to the design review panel. We have to go through the whole jest. And we were happy because we think we were achieving a great product. The last part is different. That soundscape, we didn't have the budget to actually conceive the growth on day one, but that's normal. When you have a young park, you just have to seed a great soil and allow them to grow. So we are going to plant growth of trees that will be accommodated, and you can see them throughout, that eventually in a specific Greek they will grow similar to what I show in Governor's Island, so the same style of approach. However, we wanted to create also more access because not everything will be ready on day one. So we had an idea to create this microcosm, microclimate where people can sit and be shaded, to be a little bit of a mix but its own identity, and we call them the bouquet. So it's a little bit the idea of a bouquet approach of the vicha trees, but very, very, very sectorized, and this is more or less a representation. So it's bringing a little bit of the legacy of soundscape, but at the same time being its own persona. So here they're being delivered. You can see this is really, how we work. And then boom, it takes place. It's the first bouquet. Our colleague Liam was there trying to put this up And the idea is that when you walk in this grove, all of a sudden you are renewed and refreshed. And then here's the field. You see the park is in the middle of construction, so some lawn is getting ready in the central area. We still have to plant the trees and so on. The conclusion of all of this is really because of the legacy in planning, because of the legacy of understanding connectivity through the network of open spaces, because of understanding how master plan is actually the transformative elements to conceive, future designs and outcome. We always had into our idea to create these collections of parks. And at the end of the day, we were never hired for this. So it's just the practice. We were hired to do soundscape. Eventually, that success brought us to here, and that brings us to there. And now we're actually busy, and the city doesn't know this, yes, is to actually remove another lot of parking. So this is how we work. It's almost like, this is our agenda, and remove that to create a pocket scale. So now we are actually going to have the 3 scales. So we're going to have a pocket park scale, at the scale of a Bailey Park. We have the medium side, which is soundscape, which was the first one. And in the middle of the Bryant Park, we're going to have actually the convention center. At the end of the day, it's a collection of parks that when the venue starts, or where the city starts on, it's really a district. So the city always wanted to achieve a new identity, a new character that blends with the Art Deco, that blends with Lincoln Lane, but that blends all together as a district for the arts and culture for people. And we really think that the new identity is really thanks to the beauty of this pattern and character, the mosaic, the composition of the pathway structure is what tied everything together with the greenery at the end of the day who brings it all together. So that actually is, quite a lot of years of work since 2011 till now, series of people engaged and committed to it until this moment, and we hope to open it in December. The next project has to do a little bit more with master planning, a true master planning without a second agenda, but we were hired to do master planning. And here is at the omen of actually the main fountain garden, which, when we were hired, we only asked, what is your aspiration? And it was basically to be the great gardens of the world. That was the spirit. The DuPont family was pretty fascinated with the great gardens of the world, and they started Longwood. And you could see that specifically he was personally in relationship with the world fairs and visiting in Europe all of the different gardens, Versailles, for example. He was pretty fan of the fountains. It was such a piece of technology, and here a series of gardens that actually all of you can relate, which was part of his inspiration to start. And Longwood is a quite important project for us because it really brings a new face for West State. Obviously, the previous projects that I showed, you may say, wow, West State is very contemporary. I think West State has an edge toward design at West State, not West 9. However, this project really demonstrates how can we understand culture and legacy and how can we interpret that. So master plan basically is a strategy. It is not a design. And with that said, you really have to go into the site research and the conditions. Here is a site photo where basically the buildings, so the DuPont family, they decided in a smart way, they know what they were doing, to put the buildings on the ridge and then the gardens facing south, so they get the best sun exposure. Also, you get the views, right? Here's the site that we were intervening, so we were looking not just within the site, but we were looking all the way to the Brandywine Valley and the Pastoral Landscape, and what does that landscape mean? Because they have many types, so you can see a native forest, pastorals, here the gardens, cultivated woodlands, native, non-native, and the different conditions. Obviously, through time, Longwood, like any other organization, Disney also went through this. They start growing, and there's a moment they hit a glass ceiling, and then all of a sudden there's like 5 entry routes. There are like 5 parkings everywhere, parking. And there's no sense of orientation. It's typical question, how do I get here, how do I get around? You lose it, you lose your experience. So for us, second point, you have to understand sequence. As landscape architects, that's what we do best. Architects, they understand object. We understand sequence, we understand process, we understand narrative, we understand how we have to go through each one of these spaces that they move. So for us, it was very important to tell them, you gotta stop really with your spaghetti thinking of how to organize, what do we do next project, where do we do it, because you don't have a plan. And at the end of the day, master plan will tell you a tool to implement. So here you can see it in a very simple way. It's basically all organized by the ridge, which sits right here. You can see this is the main fountain garden. This is actually the gardens per se. This is the conservatory, my bad, and a series of other spots that they have, and then the forest. And it's so simple. And you can see it because the contours are telling you. So this is the high part. You have basically the wooded areas and the meadows. and this is how they were thinking. Freeway, now we have to do another parking lot because we want to grow, we want more parking, we're going to redirect. Traffic engineer comes in the table and they do an spaghetti, and that's what you get. So for us, you got to make it very simple. Very simple. You have to understand human intuition, how to navigate through the site. You have to understand choreography. So at the end of the day, we delivered this plan, which was basically trying to articulate that for that leadership, for the next 50 years, they know what to achieve. Very simple. So this is the first pilot project because they want to double and increase the level of audience was the main fountain garden. So we classified, you will have the legacy projects, the North Entry project because it's a mess, and the opportunity to new projects that you will sprinkle throughout as you find philanthropists and donors. Very simple. So I will walk you in a very quick mode because I believe we can run short of time, but what I want to show you through is through the process of implementation and the process how we were able to transform a landscape by basically conserving his heritage. So this is the main fountain garden. You will say, well, but it looks very fine. But when you zoom in, you will actually find where are the deficiencies. You will always arrive through the conservatory. The conservatory is the main house, which you can see here. And it's on a high plateau, and then this is a surprise factor to the fountain. So here's the conservatory. You come out, you have the Victoria Regia standing there in front of you, and this is the view that you will see. This is the main fountain garden. And you might stand, it all looks fine, but when you actually walk it in through fence and picket fence and another fence and cracks. So for us, it was very important to restore it. So you can see here, you cannot see it, you cannot access, we understand. But how can we make it more interface with the people? You can see here the aging situation, also performing. But the beauty of the conception of the anatomy of the design, you can see high terrace, lower terrace, under the arcade, you will have a different perception. So you have a dialogue to the middle terrace and going back, and then the trees are in a slope, framing the green. This is what it used to be. It was lacking a lot of sequence. It was lacking a little bit of dialogue. But we went all the way. We basically turned it down because we really had to work on this. So there was no way back. If you talk to your plumber, he say, you gotta better start the kitchen again. So this is actually all the pipe system for the fountain, because that was a fountain, beginning of the 20th century. And now we're doing a fountain, wet design all the way. And here you can see then the caissons happening. We're also doing everything underneath because all the pipes, so it's really an investment. So we have to dig the whole dirt out. We have to bring new soil because we need a top quality soil to dump it and regrade after we finish the whole excavation. We took every ornament, and with a tin of actually craftsmanship, they actually repair the ornaments and bring it back to life, and then start to play the pieces. You can see the fountains. And there was this part, this is my favorite part, is to actually, the tradition of gardens, there's no gardens with great hedges, right? But how do you do a hedge that doesn't go into mimicking, neoclassicism, how you be contemporary? So we were always fascinated that the hedge is almost like Elizabeth Taylor's, for those who knows Elizabeth Taylor. New generation, specifically, it's the eyebrows, so how she did a great job. So for us, it was always, to really work. This is actually when we pick up the main fountain garden. You can see the eyebrows, actually the edge, and we think we want to be like her, but maybe we make it finish, a little bit more like Cleopatra, or maybe we did a little bit more. But this was the final outcome. So we thought that it was missing hierarchy to actually highlight the plan, and this was the composition we actually did, and then just tried to achieve it. So it's very beautiful because it was trying to compose a new kind of, inspire of a new kind of a morphology. And here working with the craftsmen and try to put them together so they were standard, they were traditional to the typical guys. Said, no, put it closer, just teach it to each other. And then within each other, they will grow and they will start to create the morphology. And you can see that actually now it stands out. Now you understand el pater, you understand actually how it's creating the space and how you're just working with the heritage of what landscape used to be. So I hope Mr. Dupont, he feels proud. Here you can see actually the stage that it was, and there was a big fence, so you couldn't interact with any of this. And it was really falling apart. And for us, we said we just keep it simple. We just planned a good bow structure to let this, live for another 200 years. This is quite fascinating because this is the power of an arcade. If you read through, sometimes it's solid, sometimes you go through, some you go up. Here you have the specific ornaments. This one is perforated and creates a welcome. So it's actually quite nice. And at the end of the day, the arcade, what it does is framing. So when you arrive to the conservatory, lower or low, you can see actually through. And that sense of ceremonial arrival was already there, but they've forgotten they have that. So how do you actually tailor the people to have a sequence, right? And then to get into this room, you can buy a drink before you go into it. You know, delivering and reinventing. This was actually gone, so you can actually sit and you can touch the water and not having a fence and be separated, you know. And actually that was quite an achievement to achieve that battle of not having fence, because that was the previous culture. How do you move from there? You can see the lack of thickness and shape to a more bold and sharp, so you actually feel you can touch it. You can even feel that you can sleep in it. It feels almost like a pillow. And the people immediately, by intuition, they step in and they interact with the water and the fountain. And then the gutters, how they're spilling the water down, and without being absolutely reinventing the identity, but respecting the identity. And to conclude, here we have basically the alley of trees that actually they were at the end of the lifespan, but basically they're located here in an abstract way, which are pretty important because they deliver the space, they frame the space. And obviously is very critical the way how they're going to interact. So if you come high, you can see back and you feel the framing where you're all the way at the end. So for us, starting with a planting for a long, healthy lifespan of those trees was very critical. So here you can see, you know, back when you arrive, you can see the backdrop. And when you are on the other side, you see back to the conservatory and you can see the eyebrows in a hedge condition. Here, planting the trees is what's quite ambitious, the dialogue of the above and the below, looking down to the terrace. Actually, there were even parts where we have herbal gardens and the middle of the parterre, seeing the beautiful symmetry and perfection, all the way to the paving details that we actually recreated and took away with real granite. We designed even the ornament, recreating all drawings that we found in the archive for the railing, and that detail which you see here, we absorbed to create a family of seating, which actually comes back there. So when we design, we try to create a language that is all part of one family, to be able that you don't have, 20 type of furnishing, but it's all actually linked together. And here you just basically see the outcome at the day of the opening, which is actually delivering that interface that we were all trying to look for. Of course, with the hydrojet power of the 21st century, that we can now really have this water really invigorating and expressing all the way out to the max, with a little bit of illumination in a very settled way. So here I'm just gonna flow through these lights so you can see some colors. But here is so beautiful because now that we are able to open, we discover a cave. So if you can see over here, there is a little entry. You can now walk before there was a fence. And you can see here a little bit of, like a grotto, more in a Pennsylvania way, with a light well, so you will be surprised. And it's all about, the poetry when you come into the space and then you're surprised. That was always there, with the touch of natural materials expressing through the light, and then the help of the water. And at the end of the day, you maybe come out of the cave, and this is happening while the performance is happening. So how the atmosphere changes, and it's important because that is where you touch the sensibility of people. And at the end of the day, I think that is very majestic. I will stop here because we have reached the time, but I want to thank you all for the work and to having the time to see what I do.